Welcome to E-Bible Fellowship's Bible Study. In this series of Bible studies, we'll be taking a closer look at the Bible's evidence for the completion of the prolonged Judgment Day and the end of the world occurring in the year 2033. And now here's your host and Bible teacher, Chris McCann.
Hello and welcome to E-Bible Fellowship's Bible Study that is looking at the book of Jonah. This is study number 16 in Jonah chapter 2, and it's part of an ongoing series of studies that is looking at the biblical evidence for the end in the year 2033. Okay, last time we were in Isaiah 24, and I want to go back there and read again. I'll read from verse 5. The earth also is defiled under the inhabitants thereof, because they have transgressed the laws, changed the ordinance, broken the everlasting covenant. Therefore hath the curse devoured the earth, and they that dwell therein are desolate. Therefore the inhabitants of the earth are burned, and few men left. Okay, this is where we left off last time. And let's consider, this is always what we should do when we read the Bible, because there's so much to consider. But let's think. All right, God is making a statement. What do we know about the statements of God in the Bible? They are always true. They're always faithful. God cannot lie. Everything we read in the Bible is absolute truth. Absolute truth. This is describing Judgment Day. The fact that it refers to the curse devour the earth, and they that dwell therein are desolate, and the inhabitants of the earth are burned. The inhabitants of the earth. That's everyone. If we go back to Revelation, we were in Revelation 9. If you recall, when the great star, or the star from heaven, who is Christ, he came down, he fell into the earth, because the earth is the object of the wrath of God, and he opened the bottomless pit. We saw that in Revelation 9:2, and he opened the bottomless pit, and there rose a smoke out of the pit as the smoke of a great furnace, and the sun and the air were darkened by reason of the smoke of the pit. And I was saying, this is indicating that God has brought the condition of hell, which was below in the bottomless pit, he's brought it up to the earth where men dwell, where the people are living on the face of the earth. And again, spiritually, the smoke indicates the fire from the great furnace, which is God's wrath. Our God is a consuming fire, because he's wrathful against the rebellious people, the sinners that have transgressed his law, and he is now come to bring judgment. It's the official day of judgment. May 21, 2011, Judgment Day, exclamation point, was the declaration that was made far and wide to the nations leading up to that time, and that declaration was true. It came to pass. It happened. Spiritually, it did indeed bring the day of God's wrath to this world, and spiritual flames began to burn. And we can see, just look at all the trouble. The world's been troubled for several years now, hasn't it? All kinds of trouble. Economic trouble. Remember that worldwide plague that shut down everything and many people died? That troubled the whole earth. And you can see the turmoil that's going on in practically every nation in the world. There's inner turmoil, inner forces at work. It's not just Russia against Ukraine or Israel against this Middle East country. It is not just physical fighting that men are doing. They've always done that, but it is fighting within each nation. Yes, it's politics, but it's also social situations. It's everything. It's everything. There's been a huge change in the world, and what we are witnessing is massive division that is taking place in nation after nation, and this is God's wrath working itself out. The division of the nations is an indication the world in the battle of Judgment Day, and that's if you want to know the players, you have God over here and his saints, and you have Satan and his people who are all unsaved inhabitants of the world, whether they know it or not, and that's the two corners. Now, who do you think's going to win? Well, it didn't take long, and God, in shutting the door, effectively killed all unsaved inhabitants of the earth. He began to open his scriptures and reveal the revelation of his righteous judgment. So the Bible, as though on fire, is emanating forth flames like fire and brimstone in the spiritual realm of things. And the Lord is troubling the inhabitants of the earth. So there's just no peace. There had never been any peace for the wicked, but there was a semblance of it, we could say, in the day of salvation. Now there's not even that. It is a time of God's wrath. Well, at the end of chapter 8 in Revelation, the last verse leading into chapter 9, the Lord said this, and chapter 8 was when judgment was detailing the judgment began at the house of God, the church, typified by the third part. And then the first four trumpets sounded, verse 13, Revelation 8:13, and I beheld and heard an angel flying through the midst of heaven, saying with a loud voice, Woe, woe, woe to the inhabitants of the earth, by reason of the other voices of the trumpet of the three angels which are yet to sound. Woe, woe, woe. Three trumpets, three woes, to indicate the purpose of God has come to finally punish mankind, to bring the sinful rebellion of the creature man to a conclusion, and there will be a time period called Judgment Day, though it be longer than an actual 24-hour day. It according to biblical evidence, it'll be 23 inclusive years, 22 actual. If the evidence proves correct in the year 2033, that would be the concluding year, the end of all things, if, again, we're correct about these things. And so the inhabitants of the earth are the object of the wrath of God. If we go back to Isaiah 24, we read again in verse 6, Therefore hath the curse devoured the earth, and they that dwell therein are desolate. Therefore the inhabitants of the earth are burned, and few men left. Burned up. Spiritual flames. Our God is a consuming fire. Is God literally a consuming fire? No. It's an expression to relate his anger. His anger is typified as a burning, consuming fire, and he will burn up the wicked. 2 Peter 3 tells us there will be a literal fiery end to this creation, that the elements will melt with a fervent heat, and all God will have to say on that literal last day is be loosed, and all the atoms that are bound by his word. God is the one who's held everything together. In him we live and move and have our being. He just ceases to support he is the platform, in other words, to use a little, you know, technical language. He's the platform the whole creation is based on. And he will simply cease to support us, support this world, this universe, and this sinful rebellion, and it'll be gone in a fiery destruction like that. That's the end. But in the meantime, till we get to that point, that's the literal last day, there's a judgment, a prolonged judgment that's spiritual, in which there is burning spiritual flames, and it is already spiritually burnt up all the wicked, all unsaved inhabitants of the earth. But those spiritual flames do not burn God's elect. That's why it says the inhabitants of the earth are burned and few men left. Now, I would encourage you, look up the word few. In the Bible defines its own terms. It's its own dictionary. You could look up the word few in Webster's dictionary, and you'll get a definition. But if you look it up in the Bible, you get a particular definition that is in tune with all Scripture, that is God's definition. And in one place, Matthew 22, we read in verse 14, "For many are called, but few are chosen." Few are chosen. Chosen is a word that identifies with the elect. Few are elect, because that's the truth. God predestinated certain ones in his election program, and out of the whole of mankind, they're few. There's billions of people, somewhere around 8 billion people on earth presently. Out of that number, perhaps God does tell us he saved a great multitude, which the biggest number the Bible uses is 200 million. But let's say that is the number. If there's 200 million elect, how many non-elect? How many are in their sins who have now no hope of salvation, because God's salvation of the soul has been complete and he shut the door of heaven? Which is why once he shut the door, it's as though they're all burned. They're all burned. They're all under the wrath of God. And it would be 7 billion, so many 100 million. So tremendous numbers, tremendous. Many called. Even there, that's narrowing it down, because that's referring to those that entered into the churches, not to every human being. Although when the gospel went to the nations, that was as though they were called. But many are called, few are chosen. And even on the ark in the days of Noah, how many were saved at that point? Well, the Lord tells us that there were 8 souls, but he also identifies them as few in 1 Peter chapter 3. We read in verse 20, "Which sometime or for a time were disobedient, when once the long suffering of God waited in the days of Noah, while the ark was a preparing, wherein few," that is 8 souls, "were saved by water." Few. How many people in the world? Probably, a handful of million at that time. And all outside the ark. God shut the door of the ark. And in shutting the door of the ark, he sealed the fate of everyone outside. They would perish in the floodwaters, man, woman, and child. And he chose to save 8 people, 4 men, 4 women, all in the same family. 8 souls, few. Many called, few chosen. That is basically typical throughout all biblical history, but throughout the whole history of the world, even into our time. God has chosen few. So Isaiah 24:6 is telling us the inhabitants of the earth are burned, but few men left. Now, the word left, that idea we find in Zechariah 13. Just think of that. It's saying that a fire burned all over the earth, everywhere in the world. In order for the inhabitants of the earth to be burned, there would have had to have been a worldwide fire, and in that worldwide fire, few are left. And the few, it's targeted language indicating the ones God chose to save, the elect. And so, of course, it has to be spiritual. There is no way that literal fire could burn all over the world. God did literally flood the world with water, and he tells us he will destroy the world with fire, but that's the last ultimate day that we're looking ahead to in the year 2033. And that'll be a fiery destruction, yes, of all the inhabitants of the earth. That'll be the consuming fire, the annihilating fire, removing them from existence and the whole creation from existence. And there will be few men left. So that's true. That's true. But the statement in Isaiah 24:6 has more meaning than that. It is not just telling us what's true in that very last day, but what's true throughout the entirety of a prolonged judgment day that is spiritual in nature. We read in Zechariah 13, and here it'll be kind of similar. It says in verse 8, "And it shall come to pass that in all the land," now in the Hebrew word translated land can also be translated earth. So we could read this, "In all the earth, saith Jehovah, 2 parts therein shall be cut off and die, but the third shall be left therein." Okay, so you get the picture. 2 parts, that would be the majority, the 2/3, and they're cut off and die. 1 part, 1/3, the minority, few, they are left therein. It says in the next verse, verse 9, "And I will bring the third part through the fire, and will refine them as silver is refined, and will try them as gold is tried. They shall call my name, and I will hear them. I will say, it is my people, and they shall say, Jehovah is my God." There it is. There it is. In all the earth. That's what verse 8 said. "Saith Jehovah, 2 parts cut off. But the third shall be left." And what's he going to do with the third? Bring the third through the fire. The fire. Where is the fire? In the land, in the earth. If we go back to Isaiah 24, we read a little further along this statement in verse 15. "Wherefore glorify ye Jehovah in the fires, even the name of Jehovah God of Israel in the isles of the sea." Glorify Jehovah in the fires. In the fire, like Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. They were cast into the burning fiery furnace. And then a fourth, like the Son of Man or the Son of God, it was Jesus Christ, protected them, and they were not burned. Historically, that's not a spiritual picture. That's although it paints spiritual pictures, that was physical. It was a physical manifestation and happening in time, in history, in the Babylonian kingdom, where evil king Nebuchadnezzar would think nothing of chopping people up or throwing them into a burning fiery furnace. And he threw these three young Hebrews into the burning fiery furnace because they refused to bow down to the golden image he had set up as an idol. And very respectfully, they said, no, we will not. And he was furious. Nebuchadnezzar typifies Satan, and he had his soldiers carry them to the furnace and throw them in. And no hurt came upon them. Actually, they came out, they were bound in their hosen, their clothes, and the Lord makes a point that there wasn't even a singe, not a thread was singed, nor the smoke of fire upon them. You see how God protects his people in literal flames, if it so be his will. In that case, it was. Normally, if the elect can die like anyone else can die. If we're in a burning building and 100 people die, one might be an elect child of God. But God wanted to make a point there and paint a spiritual picture. But what he's saying about Judgment Day, he's referring to the spiritual flames of his wrath, that he will have his people, like the third part, go through the fire. They'll go through the fire. The inhabitants of the earth are burned. Two parts, cut off and die. It's only the third part that goes through. They experience the flames of the wrath of God upon the earth. It's in all the earth. It's the inhabitants of the earth. And again, in Isaiah 24:15, wherefore glorify ye Jehovah in the fires, even the name of Jehovah God of Israel in the isles of the sea. This is an example of Hebrew parallelism, where the first part of the verse is restated in the second part of the verse, and they're equivalent. For example, in the fires would be the same as in the isles of the sea. And what are the isles of the sea? Some Pacific islands out there? Well, all the continents are isles. They're islands. And so it's continuing with the understanding from verse 6, the inhabitants of the earth. This is worldwide. It's all over in all nations, that they're all burned, but the few men are still alive. They remain, they're left. That's what Zechariah 13:9 told us as well. Let me make sure I remember that correctly. Revelation 13:8. Two parts therein shall be cut off and die, but the third shall be left therein. Few men left. Why? Why that language of being left? And it reminds us, and we'll have to finish with this for this study, of 1 Thessalonians chapter 4, verse 15. For this we say unto you by the word of the Lord, that we which are alive and remain, if you're left, you're remaining. If you remain, you're left. We which are alive and remain unto the coming of the Lord shall not prevent them which are asleep. For the Lord himself shall descend from heaven with a shout, with the voice of the archangel, and with the trump of God, and the dead in Christ shall rise first. Then we which are alive and remain shall be caught up together with them in the clouds to meet the Lord in the air, and so shall we ever be with the Lord. Wherefore comfort one another with these words. We, the elect people of God, all truly saved, have been left on the earth since May 21, 2011, to go through the fire of the wrath of God, and we will glorify him in that fire. Glorify ye, or at least we're commanded to, glorify ye Jehovah in the fires, in the isles of the sea. Glorify him by faithfully walking like men, like Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego walked into the furnace. Well, now the furnace, remember Revelation 9? The smoke came off a great furnace. The whole earth is under the power of that furnace, of the wrath of God, and the smoke is rising up, darkening the sun. The whole world's on fire. Wherever the elect are, in India, in China, in the U.S., in Russia, in South America, wherever God's elect people are, we are called upon to serve Him, to obey Him, to give one last service to Him at this time in these evil days. We are called upon to glorify Him, not by escaping the fire. There's nowhere to escape to, in that sense, a literal escape. We are here. And since we are here, as God says in Revelation 14, in the context of Judgment Day, here is the patience and the faith of the saints. So may it be the Lord's will that we are obedient and faithful to His word and His commandments of feeding the sheep. And may we, by His grace, be moved and His Spirit within us, moving us to will and to do of His good pleasure over the course of these days.
Thank you for joining us for E-Bible Fellowship's Evening Bible Studies with your host and Bible teacher, Chris McCann. For more studies and information, visit our website at www.ebiblefellowship.org. Until our next Bible study, may the Lord's perfect will be done.